Okay. Hi, I'm Candace.
And I'm Belle. Welcome back to our Closing the Early Literacy Gap podcast. Are you an early learning teacher, either preschool or kindergarten or early elementary rather, who wonders why you can't seem to help all the kids in your class?
Or are you a parent searching for answers to why your child isn't reading?
Or maybe you're an administrator or a trainer of teachers and you're still trying to find answers for your teachers.
If you fit into one of these categories, then you are in the right place.
Yes, we are current elementary school teachers, and we have realized with heartbreaking truth that there are so many gaps in teaching early literacy, and that is having a profound effect upon our students, our children, and on society as well. So we're hoping to bring awareness to that and also help discuss resources and practical applications of how to help close this gap.
Yes, and this is our third episode.
In this
episode, no, go ahead.
We're just glad you're here. And in this episode, we're going to talk more about like what schools are doing wrong. In the last episode, we focused more on general scientific difficulties, right?
Yes.
And why and the fact that teachers don't know how to teach and parents don't know how to help. And so we're going to get into a little bit more why teachers don't know how and what's happened with that and what's happening in schools.
Yes, absolutely. Teachers right now are being trained in programs that are being sold, not necessarily in the science behind it. An example or some references to this is the podcast Sold a Story by Emily Hanford.
Yes, if you haven't seen that, it's a really, really great podcast that goes through this whole process of what's happened over the last several decades with learning how to read and why schools are using programs that aren't working. And so we're going to get into just kind of the overall of those programs today.
Yes. The next part, anecdotal evidence, important to consider, but it's not really good science. I mean, like we were talking about in our last episode, using stories and using your personal experiences, especially as teachers, is a great feedback loop, and it is important. We're not trying to downsize that at all, but it's not necessarily good science, because what has worked for one cohort of students might not work for your next cohort of students. And I just think it's important that you look at the science and the data behind certain things so you can try and reach all students and not have to start from square one with each new class.
And we believe that anecdotal type of science or evidence has led to the whole language versus phonics wars that happened. It actually started decades ago.
Right.
So that's kind of, we want to kind of get into that a little bit, the whole language versus phonics wars. Whole language is more memorizing words, not decoding it, assumptions about what works based on their personal experience. And also it's a lot more fun for teachers and for kids, because whole language is more just like, oh, let's read books together. Let's expose kids to lots of books, and they'll figure out how to read on their own.
And it's faster.
Yep.
And so when you put all three of those things and you're like, yeah, that sounds good, right? Especially as a teacher or a parent, you're like, yes, I want to do this faster. I want it to be more enjoyable, right? Create a positive experience for my child. This is going to sound really appealing. However,
and it's hard work doing the phonics stuff.
Yes.
And I do want to mention that that in the Sold the Story podcast, Emily Hanford kind of tells the story behind how whole language started. So that's another reason we recommend you listening to that. You can get more details about that. And she's such a great storyteller. She does a super fantastic professional job of it. But one thing that stuck out to me is that she talked about Marie Clay, who was a researcher, and she's kind of the one that kind of came up with this. And so we're going to quote from the Sold the Story podcast what Marie Clay found and why she came to the conclusion that whole language was the way to go.
Okay, so in here she wrote, you will be familiar with the old game 20 questions. Reading something is like that game. According to Clay's theory, when good readers come to a word they don't know, they ask themselves good questions, like, what word would make sense here? For example, if a girl in a story is getting ready to ride a horse and she puts something on her horse that starts with an S, the word must be saddle. Clay also noticed that there are things good readers don't do. They don't laboriously sound out words. They don't get stuck on the letters. She thought good readers use the letters in words as one of their clues, but she was convinced that letters are not very good clues, not that reliable, and sometimes just kind of confusing. She concluded that good readers use the letters in words in an incidental way. She thought they must just skim the letters to confirm they're getting the meaning of what they're reading.
Right. So you can see that. In fact, it maybe some of you have seen things going around that say, that it'll be like a passage and it'll have the letters mixed up in the middle of the words.
Yes.
And they'll just have the same first, and they'll say, see, people can read if they just know the first and second letter. And you can go through and you can read that passage and you know what it's supposed to say.
Right.
And so people have taken that and assumed that means that kids don't read word per word. But I want to read something from the Letters Manual.
Okay. Go right ahead and do that.
Or do you want to read it?
No, I was just going to say, you know what they say about assuming?
What?
It makes an ass out of you and me. So you should never assume.
So true.
Right?
So true. Right. I love that. Okay. So, right here, it says, I actually recently had somebody tell me this too, say that kids don't read word letter by letter.
Oh yeah. You were telling me this.
Right.
Okay.
And so I pulled this out because I just learned this in letters and I was like, actually, that's not true. And I pulled this out and it says, although we may not be aware of it, we do not skip over words, read print selectively, or recognize words by sampling a few letters of the print, as whole language theorists once proposed. Reading is accomplished with letter by letter processing of the word. And there's references there to studies done by Rayner, Foreman, Perfetti, Pasetsky, and Seidenberg in 2001. So I just want to make sure that we're citing that, where this is coming from, because again, we want to do science with integrity.
Right.
And then it continues on by saying fluent readers do perceive each and every letter of print. Thus, we can distinguish casual from causal, grill from girl, and conversation from conservation. Better readers process the internal details of printed words and match them to their individual speech sounds that combine to make words. Even when chunks are recognized, they can be analyzed into their individual phoneme graphing correspondences on demand. So when you get to be a good readers, instead of just being good guessers or detectives,
right,
as Marie Clay assumed from what she observed,
yes,
good readers actually have learned the process. They've learned that the sounds and letter correspondences so well that they're able to distinguish the different sounds. Right. And I think, this is just me saying, again, we want to have science with integrity, but I'm going to give my little opinion here.
Okay.
That a lot of kids can read the whole language by. But I don't think they're actually reading by guessing. I think that these are kids whose brains catch on
a little bit quicker.
They catch on to the orthographic mapping.
Right. And we're actually going to talk about that in another episode about how the brain works when you're reading and all the parts and pieces that kind of go together.
We'll talk about the brain and everything, but we're not going to get into that now. But we did just want to point out that is the debunking of whole language approach.
Right.
Phonics, on the other hand, is teaching sound by sound, systematic and explicit.
Yes. And it's longer and it's more tedious and it's harder. But in the long run, what they've noticed is that kids who started off and were learning phonetically on how to blend and how to decode and how to do all these things actually had better and more fluent reading skills later on in life.
Yeah.
So it's like build the strong foundation and you're good to go.
Right. And actually, science has known for a long time that phonics is better than whole language. But it's been really hard to get teachers on board. And there's another quote from Sold a Story about that.
Yep. So Emily Hanford also said in her podcast, which is called Sold a Story, by the way. So if you haven't heard it,
please go watch it.
Okay. So then this one right here, it says, in the 1950s, no one really understood how people read or how little kids learned to read or how to do it. There were theories, but no one really knew for sure. Since then, there has been a huge amount of research, thousands of studies, and what was once a big mystery is now common knowledge among cognitive scientists and psychologists and other researchers who study how people learn. But it's not common knowledge among teachers, and for the past few years, I've been trying to figure out why. What I've discovered is that there's an idea about reading that runs counter to the scientific evidence. This idea is deeply entrenched in American education. Teachers learn about this idea in college. They learn about it in training they get on the job. The idea is in their curriculum materials. It's in tests they use to figure out a student's reading level. And this idea is everywhere.
Yes, and that idea that she talks about is this whole language idea that we're talking about. That kids can figure out how to read words based on the context of the story rather than sounding it out, learning the decoding. And earlier I had this thought while you were talking about that.
Absolutely.
I don't remember if it was one of the quotes you were reading or what, where it was like, there's so many people, and I've heard this a lot of times. People say, well, English is so confusing and there's so many different rules and exceptions to the rules that you can't trust phonics instruction.
Right.
And so you might as well just teach you how to guess. But the truth is there is actually a lot, there's a lot of, most words actually do follow some kind of pattern.
Right.
And brains that are good at picking up those patterns are the ones that become good readers automatically.
Right.
It's not brains that are good at detective work. It's brains that are good at picking up those patterns of sound. Like, for example, IGH.
Yeah.
It says I every time.
Right.
And some kids don't need to be taught that. Once they've seen it enough times, their brains automatically pick it up. But other kids, they can be taught it and they still see IGH and say ugh, you know, or ig, you know, because their brains haven't yet been trained to see that as one sound. And they need more systematic, more explicit instruction and more practice on that sound to make it work, which we can talk about more later.
Yes.
Okay, National Reading Panel.
Yep.
So I feel like I'm doing all the talking.
You are just fine. You guys, like I already said in previous episodes, Belle is the one who does all this research. Belle is the vessel of knowledge. I love writing on her coattails of knowledge. I love learning from her.
But she's great at taking this stuff and applying it practically. And we're going to get into that more on later episodes. But right now we're talking about research. So
yes, research is her baby. And so it's okay. I am definitely not offended. And I love listening to her talk about this because our brains work different. And my brain,
we're a good team.
I use my feedback loop and create things that I think will work for my class or for my students and for other people. And then I learn things and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, so I created this not knowing this, but it actually follows this. Or, ooh, I can use this research that Belle just taught me about or that I learned in this class and now it'll work better. Right. And so that's, you know.
But also, you know, actually you saying that makes me think this is another reason why it's been so hard for science to get put in, because teachers have been doing things for a long time that they did based on their own feedback loop or on their own thing, and that they think this works in my class. And so when somebody tells them it's not right, then they go, wait, like, no, that can't be. This works in my class.
And they get personal about it.
They get personal about it, yeah. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention, so as Emily Hanford mentioned, there's lots of studies, and those all culminating in one report in the year 2000. There was a panel created. It was called the National Reading Panel. If you haven't heard of it, you can look it up. You can read the whole report that they put. This was formed in 1997 at the request of Congress. And they, this is just a summary of what Sally Shaywitz says about the National Reading Panel. She said the National Reading Panel found that children who are taught phonics systematically and explicitly make greater progress in reading than those taught with other types of instruction. And so this really triggered some national policies and that tried to force schools to follow this. And the schools gave a lot of pushback.
Right.
And so that's just a quick summary about it. But in the end, a lot of the programs that were very whole language programs started to add in some phonics so that they could look like they were following the protocol of this. But they were still using the whole language methods.
Well, they're digging in their heels. I mean, you think about your own personal bias, which we talked about already, right, in the education system.
Definitely.
But then you also think about the expense that schools have to put in.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you have that huge expense and you have something and you can just add little inexpensive things to meet the criteria.
Right. People really dig in their heels about what they're doing. So when they're told that what they're doing isn't right because they don't have, like, what you're doing isn't right because you're not teaching phonics. They go, okay, well, we'll just throw some phonics in there. And so they started throwing in some phonics in there. But and this also, we're drawing a lot from Soul Story because this is a great summary of this. But Emily Hanford says that the kids were actually being taught some things about how to sound out words. The teacher did some phonics lessons, but when it came to reading books, all that instruction seemed to go out the window. So they were still reverting to the whole language, which the specific thing in the whole language that they were reverting to is called, that is really actually so bad for kids. It's actually harmful for kids. It's not just that it's, like, as long as we add phonics in, they were doing something that harmed kids, which is the cueing system.
Yeah.
And when I first heard about this cueing system, I've never taught balanced literacy. So that's what they called it. They called it balanced literacy. Instead of like whole language, now we're going to try to get the best of both worlds. We're going to do some whole learning, and we're going to do some balance. And honestly, kids do need that. They need the comprehension, the experiences. They need books read to them. They need lots of great experiences. But what they're doing is this 5 cueing system. And I really thought it was a joke when I first heard it. Because teachers, what they do is they actually cover up the word in a book, and then they have the kids try to guess what the word is based on the pictures and based on the context.
Right, which doesn't help.
And they're actually teaching them to, as Mari Clay said, to be good detectives.
Yep, and look at the
clues. And look at the clues.
Pictures.
And I thought, don't you want to look at the letters of the words? I mean, just like, okay, she's riding a saddle.
Right.
What would you put on a horse?
Yep.
What do you think is going to be the next word? They're looking at the picture or whatever.
It starts with an S.
And I thought, do teachers really teach that? And then I came across at the beginning of this school year, we were looking for place name tag things.
Yes.
One of them that I saw had a 5-hand thing, and it had the cueing system on it. Look at the picture, look at the words around it. Does it make sense? And I was like, they really are teaching this. And we neither one of us have had experience teaching that.
No.
But there's a lot of teachers that have had experience teaching that, and they're finding out, we've been doing this wrong. And it's actually harmful for kids because it teaches kids to guess.
Yep.
Kids that don't know how to decode the words, they're just taking wild guesses. And then they make mistakes. Like, I think the example she used in the sold the story is a kid who thought that Poland invited the Nazis into their country, not that they were invaded by the Nazis. Invited and invaded. Can you see how similar that would be? It could make a huge difference in the meaning. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Difference. So this is what's happening in our schools. So many schools across the country are using this. And another thing that this balanced literacy is using that is really popular, and this is something that I had heard a lot about, and I thought maybe it was a really good thing, but now the more I'm learning, the more I realize the problem with it, and that's the books that they use. They have like level books, they'll say what level are you on, K, they have those letters that tell the level. But honestly, there wasn't really a lot of science space behind those levels. And
this is where I
want to hear what you have to say about this.
My husband and I actually went out on a date last night, and we went to Barnes and Noble. Okay, because we like the quiet in Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, I've done that too.
And he went off, and I instantly went over to the kids section because I love to look at the decodable books that are available and the reading.
This is what we're going to get.
I know we're going to, and this is where my passion is.
Yeah.
But this irritates me. I pulled one and I said, hey, look, okay. This says beginning readers right here, right? And I opened the book, and he's like, yeah, right. I said, could you imagine handing this to our 4-year-old right now? She's a beginning reader. Could she read the word suddenly? No. Yeah. This is those ones, and they sell like crazy, and it frustrates me to no end.
Well, and a lot of them
are
what they call predictive text. So that because they're using that whole idea of like, we're going to try to predict what this test is going to say. Yeah. So the biggest example I can think of is a predictive textbook. And I don't want to say that this book is a bad book. I think it's a fun book, and I think it's a great book to read to kids.
Right.
But it's Brown Bear, what do you see? Do you know that book?
I love that book.
It's such a fun book.
It is.
But if you're teaching kids how to read with it, then what you're doing is you're encouraging them because they can guess what's coming next, right? Because every page is Brown Bear, what do you see? And the kids feel like they're reading.
And it's on the picture with the brown
bear. And it's
with
the picture, so then they can turn it. What do you see? I see and then you turn the page and you can see the picture, and then you can guess, it's a woodpecker or whatever. I don't know. It's been a while since I red bird, whatever.
Looking at me.
Looking at me, right? And you can guess that. The kids guess that, and then they think they're reading and they feel good about reading.
Right.
And so many schools do this because they want the kids to feel good, but really the kids aren't reading.
Right. They're guessing.
They're guessing. Exactly.
And it's detrimental to them in the future.
Right.
When they're doing that.
The kids, and so science shows that kids need to be reading decodable books, which is what Candace just mentioned. That is books where they can actually read all the words, and they're based on what phonics they've already learned.
Yes.
So if they've learned short A and short I, and they've learned a few consonants, then you could have a book that uses all those.
Right.
And some people complain about them because they're not like high quality
right. And
learning, but you can read high quality learning books to your kids. You can enjoy reading books with them with those kinds of books, and you should.
Yes.
But when the kids are reading themselves, they need to be reading decodable books so that they are practicing their own sound system, sound graphing relationship.
Yep. And building those skills. Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Okay. So that's kind of a summary of what's going wrong in the school. That's the biggest problem. This is what colleges are teaching teachers to do. This whole language thing. That's what I learned. My whole teaching kids how to read was all about, reading books with them and using comprehension strategies and things like that. Like I didn't learn any phonics rules, and then that's passing down from these programs, these curriculum programs that have been written around it, that have just been sold, well marketed and sold to schools, and there's just too many kids that are just falling through the cracks. So and then also one other thing to mention just as we wrap up.
Yes.
Teachers are so busy and overwhelmed. They don't have time to look into this themselves.
Right.
Parents are so busy and overwhelmed. And the problem comes when you have the kids who are dyslexic.
Yep.
The kids and dyslexia just means a difficulty learning how to read.
Right.
But it's highly misunderstood. And it's very difficult to diagnose. And it's very difficult to get help because teachers don't understand it. Parents don't understand it. Even special ed doesn't understand it. And so that's something that we would like to explore in a later episode as well.
Absolutely.
So we hope you'll join us for our next episode where we'll start to get into some of the more practical applications of what we can do in schools to help our kids. And so we hope you'll join us for that.
Yes. So thank you again for joining us. We hope you guys have liked what you've heard so far. Once again, we would love if you guys would reach out to us at candiceandbell@gmail.com. KandiceAndBell@gmail.com. Give us suggestions of topics you'd like to discuss. Maybe you've tried something in your class that you've noticed has worked. Maybe you're one of the teachers or parents who have been taught this whole language queuing system, and maybe you are seeing some success with it, but maybe you've added some things to it that are helping it be better. Maybe you have data that you would like to share. Maybe you have things that you'd like us to talk about. Any of these we would welcome with open arms, because we want this to be more of an open discussion platform where we are reaching out to many people and getting many ideas, not just you guys listening to both of us. Anyways, we hope you guys have a great day, and we hope you tune in next time. Bye.